siit ongi hea edasi minna nende mõtetega, et me teame, et uuenev tehnika peaks andma meile rohkem aega ja valikuvõimalusi. Kas me oskame neid kasutada heaks või halvaks, ongi meie esimese paneeli teema. Ja teemaks on siis, kas tehnoloogia ohustab inimõigusi, ja palun siia Ivar Tallo, kes on selle paneeli vestlusjuht, E-riigi Akadeemia asutaja ja nõukogu liige. Palun.
President Rüütel, ekstsellentsid, daamid ja härrad. Me just kuulsime tegelikult David Griffith'i suust seda kolmandat katsumust või third challenge tehnoloogia kirjeldus, et mida ta teeb. Nii et ta pidas selle sissejuhatuse ära, mida mina oleksin pidanud nüüd pidama. Ma lihtsalt võib-olla mõned mõtted tõmbaksin alla, et kõigepealt see, et ühel hiljutisel seminaril paar kuud tagasi, mille pealkiri oli selline nii-öelda rahulikku arengut lõhkuv kiire tehnoloogiline muutumine, seal üks Austraalia suuremat sorti eraettevõtja, konsultatsioonifirma juht tuli välja teesiga, mis mind suhteliselt rabas. Ta ütles, et teate, et riiki on liiga vähe, et meil on muutumine on praegu nii suur, et meil oleks vaja rohkem reegleid. Aga riiki on liiga vähe, riiki ei ole kuskil olnud. Vaat selleks, et me neid reegleid saaksime kehtestada, selleks me peaksime kõigepealt neid omavahel arutama. Ja ma arvan, selleks ongi see poodium ja see väga ajakohane paneel ja üldse see küsimuse tõstatus. Sest tõesti need muudatused, mis praegu kunstliku intellekti arengus toimuvad, kuidas need mõjutavad meie tulevikku, kõik need muudatused, mis on siis selles ennustavas analüütikas, kas see on õige või kuhu, nagu härra Griffith ütles, tõmmata see piir. Et mis on hea, mingile määral on see kindlasti hea. Et me paneelis hakkamegi seda kõike arutama ja küsima, siis paneelis on erinevad inimesed, kelle instituut on kokku kogunud üle maailma, neil on erinev nägemus ja me kohe hakkame seda nägemust siis arutama ja loodatavasti siis jõuame sinna. Vootele vist oli see, kes ütles, et tuleb esitada õigeid küsimusi, et meil on inimesed, kes pakuvad oma nägemusi, esitagem neile siis küsimusi, sest meil saab olema peale sissejuhatavaid väikeseid selliseid esinemisi võimalus kõigil arutada ja kaasa rääkida, sest teema iseenesest on ju väga lai. Kunagi me rääkisime sellest, et kas internet on inimõigus või sotsiaalne õigus. Eesti oli vägagi sellisel rindejoonel ja kehtestas interneti kui sotsiaalse õiguse aastal 2001, kui me mäletame. Nüüd me räägime juba sellest, et võib-olla tegelikult oleks vaja kehtestada õigust või vähemalt, mina kodus vaidlen selle lastega, et teeme nagu digivaba tsooni, et see peaks ka olema õiguseks, et jätame vahelduseks telefoni esikusse ja ei võta teda kaasa. Et neid maailm on muutumises. Proovime seda muutumist mõtestada ja nüüd ma siis kutsuksin üksteise järgi lavale meie esinejad. Esiteks mul on hea meel kutsuda Jeff Jarvist. Tema on New Yorki ajakirjanduse kõrgkooli professor ja ta räägib meile avatud internetist. Ta on selline positiivse maailmatunnetusega. Jeff, please, would you come and take a seat? So I just said to them that you are very positively looking into the life. Other negative things also?
Oh, of course, there are many choices we have to make, but let's try to plan for the positive so maybe we get there.
And he has been planning. He told me he bought some Bitcoin, so that's why it's easy for him to be positive. Okay, so Next, järgmisena ma paluksin Mojca Pajniku Ljubljana ülikooli sotsiaalteaduste dotsent. Tema räägib kodakondsusest, info väärtusest. Mojca, it is pleasure to have you here. So you held high the rights of the citizen, and what is citizen? Is that correct?
Indeed.
Very good. Please take your seat. Järgmisena on meil oma kodune inimene Ivo Juurvee, Rahvusvahelise Kaitseuuringute Keskuse teadur- ja uurimisprogrammi juht. Ja sinul nagu see lähenemine on selline neutraalne, eks? Või tähendab, et tehnoloogia võib olla heaks ja halvaks. Ivo on vaadanud nagu ajaloos neid asju, ta kirjutas oma doktoritöö muuseas riigisaladuse kaitsest Eestis, nii et täiesti selline, aga nüüd me räägime siis tehnoloogiast ja tulevikust, eks? Või sa võtad mineviku vaateid?
Ma vaatan minevikku ka ikka natukene.
Igatahes, varsti kuuleme, palun võtta istet. Järgmisena, next please, Matti Saarelainen. Tema on Euroopa hübriidohtude vastase kompetentsikeskuse direktor ehk siis valeuudiste spetsialist. Hi, Matti. I think you are then talking about all the fake news, right?
Yes.
But only the Russian fake news or American fake news? Or
All fake news.
all
let's just
fake
say so.
news.
Thank you
Okay,
very much. It's very much in our agenda. Thank you.
Take a seat. Ja viimasena siis Paul Przemyslaw Polanski, tema on Kosminski ülikooli professor. Hi, Paul.
Hello.
It's very nice. You said yesterday that you are going to talk about many revolutions. There is not just one, right?
Yes.
And we are going to suffer through them, or you're positive or negative?
I'm rather positive.
He's also an optimist. Very
Rather.
good in the morning. Please take a seat. So we will have these statements in a second, but let me just tell you that it was really a pleasure. Vabandust, nüüd ma läksin jälle inglise keelele üle, et eesti keeles ära lõpetada see ja siis me läheme inglise keelele üle. Eile õhtul oli meil väike istumine nende inimestega ja see on väga hea selline viis paneeli püüda kokku sobitada ja meil oli väga huvitavad 2 tundi, kus me vaidlesime omavahel nendes küsimustes. Me loodame nüüd nagu taas luua natuke seda õhkkonda, mis meil eile oli ja võib-olla isegi edasi minna. Suur aitäh kõigile ja Jeff, would you start? I mean, it is up to you whether you want to sit or whether you want to come here. It's just...
I'm the casual American, I'll sit. It's an honor to be here in your beautiful country for the first time. When I got the invitation, I couldn't wait to come here, and so I'm glad to spend some extra time wandering around Tallinn. I guess I come here trying to defend tomorrow against yesterday. I fear that I see a creeping moral panic about the internet and technology that's going from right now Europe to the US and from right to left. And there is certainly much negative that can occur with technology, but I think there's much positive, and if we don't plan for that, then I think that we could end up cutting off the opportunity we have. I want to start by just reminding us of all the good that does indeed come from the technology that we now have in a connected world. We can hear new voices who have never been heard before in history. We enable people to connect with each other in ways that was never possible before and to act together. Indeed, to even tear down governments, though as we know right now, the internet is better at tearing down than at building up, but we're starting. We have, I think, a different attitude toward knowledge in the world. At the simple level of when we used to need a fact, we would have to go to the library to get it, and now we can go and get it in our phone in a matter of less than a second. That changes the discussion. Now, whether we use those facts and respect those facts is another matter. Certainly, the internet and technology are sparking all kinds of innovation that are only possible with it, and entrepreneurship leading to new jobs and new industries. These are goods that come from the technology that we're beginning to fear. And I think that we have reason to worry about the bad, but let's also always remember the good and what we're trying to preserve and act on there. And indeed, I think if you assess the world as we have now, you hear a different media narrative than you see in reality. I challenged myself the other day to go through my Facebook feed and look for the rampant hate and lies and fear that we hear about in the media narrative, and I could not find it. Because in my own feed, I found people I like and love telling me about their lives. It was a good thing. I think we also can fall too easily into the notion that we can blame technology for our problems when in fact it may be our own fault. We in media, and I'm a journalist, deserve a great deal of blame for where we are in this world right now. Our institutions have for too long been deaf to the people they serve and represent. Those people are finally heard. They are heard with anger, and that makes institutions quake with fear. That's the setup of where we are. Now, there certainly are many risks posed by this technology. First, yes, to privacy, and we see the GDPR coming into Europe. But I also fear that we could risk the value and the virtue of sharing. I wrote a book about that idea, that what the internet gives us is the opportunity to connect and share with each other. And if we lock down everything that we do too much, then we risk losing that. Yes, there is manipulation from fake news. I now had a news integrity initiative working on this problem of fake news, funded by Facebook, Craig Newmark, the Ford Foundation, and others. But I also see the potential now for a flight to quality. I see a strong desire for people to return to information that matters in their lives, and for responsible sources to rise. Yes, we see harassment of people, especially of women online. There is no excuse for that in any way. We also see this being used as a tool of some forces. I was just in Ukraine, where I see that allegedly Russian forces are using the tools to take down voices that matter online. These tools of harassment can be used both ways. We see business models as an issue. The media business has lost its own business model. We blame technology for that, but it's our own fault. We have new ways to serve the public, and we're not doing that. And then we have the fear of surveillance of government, which is a real fear. Government is the worst enemy of privacy in the long run. It can do the worst to us, but we see the opportunity for some measure of relevance. That clock is going faster than I thought. So I see a risk of moral panic and over-regulation. A low watermark of freedom, a high watermark of regulation. I see fear that if we enable things to occur for the sake of a country like Estonia or Canada that does things well, we create tools that can also be used by Iran and China and others. I fear that we will cut off our innovation, that we will regulate what could happen, that anything bad that could happen becomes what rules us, and we blame others. So I want to just talk for one moment about the principles that I think we should be discussing and the progress that I see in that. At Google, I see that Google is now talking about recognizing the reliability, authority, and quality of sources in its search results. It is beginning to make judgments. That's important. Twitter must do something about harassment and about the bots and fake machines that talk as if they are humans. I know a technology executive said to me last week that people have the right of free speech, bots do not. Facebook, what Facebook can do more than anything else I would wish for in this world is to make strangers less strange. For what I see happening is that the other is being demonized and used, as Mr. Griffith said, about the fear that we have. Look in the German election, that the highest vote for the AfD came in those East German states where there aren't refugees, where there is a fear of an unknown other. Facebook could connect us to other people. Media, we in journalism must learn to listen in ways that we never have before. I started a new degree in social journalism at my school, which is all about starting with the community and teaching us to listen to, understand, empathize with, and reflect communities of diversity before we think we know what they need to know. The same must be said of other institutions, of government, of the academe, of business, that they must learn how to listen. The internet was made first to speak. We have not yet learned to listen on the internet, and we must do that. And so finally, I think that we need to talk about a question of how we recapture a moral authority in institutions. What the internet enabled the public to do is to speak and speak up about injustice. And if we do not listen to them and we do not act on that in power and in privilege, then we're losing the opportunity the internet brings us finally. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. Indeed, I think it is in 2017 we need this kind of optimist statement also, reminders that what we all hoped for and what we have achieved also. We have agreed that we don't have questions right after each speaker, so hold on for them. I have also a couple already when listening to you, but now we'll move on and we'll have Mojca statement. Thank you.
Thank you. My intervention will be focusing to reflect the new media in the field of the political realm. I will argue that the contemporary age of political communication that is characterized by the, as we've heard, proliferation of new media both offline and online marks the rise of the populist political communication. We are witnessing the erosion of party democracy that paves the way for the rise of populist democracy, with populist political parties and leaders excessively using new media to come closer to the people, shifting political style and rhetoric from informed debate to sensationalism in attempts to try to catch the attention of the voters. The concept of post-democracy has been recently used to analyze how democratic structures are becoming empty and how classical political leadership is declining, giving centrality to media speech, to public opinion pollsters, to advertising experts, recently the influencers in the internet space, but foremost the populist type of leaders who largely by way of using new media treat democracy as a marketing campaign. The internet, especially Facebook and Twitter, that enable personalized and interactive communication with the citizens have been excessively used by political party leaders coming from all the ideological spectrum, but the keenest Twitter users come from right-wing parties. And my question would be, is the emancipatory and empowering potential of the internet strong enough to enable the reflexive democracy, to enable the Kantian public use of reason? And currently these possibilities are, I would say, poorly reflected when we look at practices in the political leadership, in the political arena. The impact of Trumpian rule by tweet has been reflected as an emerging undemocratic political power. The undemocratic moment of an one-line tweet lies in the fact that the tweeting politics can become a substitute for substantial debate, that a one-line tweet can become a substitute for arguing, for sharing of arguments that on the basis of which you can come to consensual decisions that mark the good society. And as such, tweeting and Facebooking politics can pose a risk to suspend the democratic decision-making. Reflecting, I think, on the perspective of human rights, it should be noted that the populist type of democracy is largely replacing truth with opinion. The data, for example, about the Holocaust in a post-truth era can be treated as if it were not a truth, but something we can develop an opinion about. For example, the reasons for migration can similarly be manipulated as if it were not about the real reasons, but about migrants, as we've been hearing, largely abusing the European or global asylum system. So Facebooking and tweeting politicians with millions of followers can decide or declare that the refugees are actually not real refugees, but that they are terrorists, that they are not seekers of protection before persecution, but social opportunists. So in the era of the internet, I think that we are witnessing new practices of blurring the difference between facts and opinion. And in the old days, this was called propaganda. Lies not only deny the truth, but establish themselves as alternative truth. And this is exemplified today in the rising phenomenon of fake news. We've seen in history how this created a society from which the seekers of truth, so to speak, also, I mean, the defenders of human rights, are excluded, and how the majority comes to live quietly in the cave, flooded into Plato's images of shadow, when members of the community no longer see a reason to seek the truth. But of course, it would be too, I mean, I don't want to just picture a very gloomy picture, and of course, we've seen in history how the technologies have always had a revolutionary impact on the state of democracy in terms of also improving the human rights, as we've also heard today. So from telegraph to television, radio, so from the mass media era to the internet. It's of course too simple to just blame the internet. The manipulation of facts, the manipulation of truth did not happen with Twitter, it did not happen with Trump, and fake news may seem something new in the so-called post-factual society, but we've seen it in the history of propaganda, for example. So to conclude, I will argue that the future development of both the media field, the internet field, and as well as the political realm should foremost put focus on cultivating the use of reason in the internet sphere to stimulate debate and reflexive democracy.
Thank you, Mojca. Yes, you brought up the post-truth time and all these issues that we have recently in our heads, and we'll clearly are going to ponder about it. But now, Ivo, your turn.
Thank you. And first of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this event, and not only for organizing this event this year, but doing it from 2011. And not only for inviting me to speak here today, but for invitations to this conference for already 6 years. Since I'm not considering myself specialist on human rights, and I've never been trained in such a field, so we can see now that if I have learned anything from the 6 conferences previously. But before getting to the issue of internet, I would like to make some general remarks on the technology in the past. That technology is, well, it's just for making things more efficient. And what things make to be made more efficient, it's up to humans to decide. Well, for example, Machete, very useful tool, but it also can be used for violating human rights or killing, as we know. Trains, definitely very useful, but also we all know mass deportations, Holocaust, and so on, what can be done with them. Or even such highly developed things like airplanes from 9/11, we know that they can be used as weapons. But in summa summarum, so far, I guess all the new technological devices have made themselves known as from the positive side. And it applies even to nuclear weapon that has given us nuclear energy in the longer run, or even the ballistic missiles, due to which we have the global communication opportunities. When we get to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, then mostly here in this panel we are only speaking about Article 12, which concerns privacy, but from the positive side, it would be nice to point out that, for example, Article 19 that covers freedom of opinion and expression, I guess internet provides us many options in this field, and also Article 20, freedom of peaceful assembly, Article 21, access to public services, well, especially here in Estonia, when most communicating with the state we can do from our own, and it doesn't matter if you live in the Tallinn city center or somewhere in the countryside. The same applies to education or freedom to participate cultural life, mentioned in paragraph Articles 26 and 27. But to answer that, if the human rights are in free fall or even declining, then if we go back to the times that we have on the picture on the programs of our conference approximately 150 years ago, then I don't think that there was much more privacy in the village community. For example, several weeks ago, or was it a month ago, there was a Tallinn airport was evacuated because very sophisticated sexual toy was found from the luggage of somebody. And we still don't know the name of the person to whom it belonged, but I'm pretty sure that 100 years ago in village community everybody would know it instantly. And it wouldn't be a question that if Russian intelligence or Chinese intelligence or US intelligence can find it out from the internet that somebody possesses such a thing. The other thing, electrical telegraphy that was invented something like 150 years ago, and the telephone that was used a little bit later. Nobody from the very beginning considered it to be safe or private mode of conversation, and so everything had to be encrypted in order to pass it if you wanted to not to be known to any other people. So I guess it is something that we have just forgotten, and that at some point we have, I don't know for what reason, thinking that our correspondence in the internet or our telephone talk cannot be eavesdropped. But while regulating these things, it's highly problematic, not because of our own or the secret services in Western countries or democratic countries, but because of other countries like China and Russia. We definitely can regulate what our own services do or what they do domestically, but since internet is very much global environment, and we can't regulate what the other countries are doing in our, I don't know, sharing the internet, then this is a problem. And I'm pretty skeptical about the international law regulating it because, well, it's, there are, as was pointed out by previous speakers, that problems with enforcing international law, and even in things where it's very easy to notice the violations, but privacy is something which violation in the internet especially can be very easily denied. So to wrap it up, I would say that I don't think that things are especially bad, and I'm not even sure that if they are in decline in the long run. All the crises that were mentioned by our host in the opening remarks during the last year, they are definitely not caused by the technology but by humans. So no panic and common sense would be the general suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivar. Very compelling parallel, of course, with this village community of old age. And let's think about it a little bit, how it fits with the right to be forgotten. I mean, the village people didn't have this right, which now is enforced to the Google and others. But let's go on with Matti. And yes, please. Okay.
Chairman, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to, of course, first of all, thank you for inviting me and our new established center to this important meeting and conference. Security is the basis of stable and prosperous society. It is highly relevant to our understanding of human rights. The State of the Union speech by Franklin Roosevelt, referred to as the Four Freedom Speech, was one of the inspirations for the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. One of those four freedoms was freedom from fear, which is mentioned in the preamble of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Security contains functioning rule of law, which provides us with freedom from fear. Fear of criminality, fear of physical violence, fear of international aggression. With the cooperation of many different actors, the fear can be turned into the security in our societies. Measured with various indicators, Finland, which 2 days ago celebrated her 100th anniversary, is the most secure society in the world. Based on statistics, the development during the 2 recent decades has been positive. At the same time, citizens' confidence in the security has deteriorated, which is of course of great concern to all of us. Nearly all studies indicate that citizens feel less and less secure. To nations and citizens, security is an existential value. A decreased sense of security must be addressed. Threats cannot be denied, but freedom from fear requires that. Despite threats, citizens trust in their state to sustain its vital functions and to safeguard continuation of the everyday life of its citizens. Security is the objective of the state. Freedom from fear is both a vision and a mission for all of us. Franklin Roosevelt spoke about the vision that no nation will be in a position to commit an act on physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. This vision is still valid, but today the mission is broader. In the current security environment, internal security and external security cannot be separated. In a globalizing world, various power struggles will have a global reach. Linkage between internal security and external security are getting stronger. That is not to say that conventional military security should be forgotten. Conventional military deterrence is still relevant, but many things have changed. The threshold of attribution and threshold of response are higher when little green men are crossing borders in unmarked uniforms, when proxy actors are implementing cyber attacks against us, and when troops of trolls are fighting information wars among our citizens. We have seen tens of thousands of migrants flowing across Europe from the Mediterranean to the Arctic, with no question as to who they are and why they are fleeing. In Finland, we have seen asylum seekers crossing in an unprecedented manner our eastern border, which has traditionally been carefully guarded. Citizens are confused. Hybrid threats are one concept to capture some of these new phenomena and to explain the changes in the sense of security among citizenry. Hybrid influencing is understood as coordinated activities in which a state or non-state actor uses different instruments of power to exploit its targets' vulnerabilities and to achieve its strategic goals. Different means may include political, economic, technology-based pressure and information operations of various kinds, including exploitation of social media. Hybrid activities often include information operations, activities which systematically aim at changes in public opinion, in citizens' sense of security, or in attitudes of decision makers. It is a strategic attempt to make the target take decisions harmful to itself or to act against its own interest. Particularly during the era where information can be obtained in real time almost everywhere, there are many opportunities for information influencing. We have witnessed systemic actions being designed to influence public opinion, decision makers and people's behavior, and thereby to the functions of the whole society. This activity is designed to mislead the targets to make self-detrimental decisions or to act against their own best interest. What makes information influencing so effective is that it's easier to reinforce or manipulate the existing views and people's feelings based on attitudes. Society's weak points are being detected and used against that society. Is this the new normal? Personally, I have to say that this is not a problem we can learn to live with. We have been unprepared for coordinated and multidimensional threats. We lack the agility to respond on these threats. Too often we are on the defensive when we should be proactive in our strategies. Threats can be created if fear guides the assessments, and threats can be countered if they are analyzed properly and realistically. Our Centre, the European Centre of Excellence for Countering Hybrid Threats, wishes to contribute developing our policies in this regard. Freedom of speech was one of the 4 freedoms. Free media is a cornerstone of our democracy, of citizens' situational awareness of their society and the world. Due to digitalization, social media has developed into the interactive and inclusive environment. It provides a space for constructive dialogue as well as for escalation of disagreements and societal gaps. Quickly spreading information may be used as a destructive weapon against our democratic processes, to blackmail or to threaten citizens without fear of the punishment of the rule of law. Freedom from fear is a fundamental human right. When implementing this right to our citizens, we need to respect other human rights, including freedom of speech. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Matti. Freedom from fear. Well, a very nice thought, but we'll come back to that now. It is time for Paul. Proszę bardzo.
Shall I? Okay.
Whether you want or not.
Yeah, I can speak here. Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm a lawyer and a technologist, a programmer, and I've been wondering for many years, how can we regulate the internet in a meaningful way? This is a tough question because we live in the era of not one internet revolution or digital revolution, but actually a set of revolutions. So the digital revolution was sparked by the invention of the internet, but then we had the revolution of the web of the 1990s, then we had the revolution of mobility, now we have the revolution of artificial intelligence. So it's really hard to regulate these things, and I guess we have to get used to it. We have to realize that we want to be able to develop new laws that will regulate these phenomena very quickly, especially if we do not take time to really learn how people are using these technologies. Because these technologies, I would argue, are neutral. They can be used for good purposes and they can be used for bad purposes. So it really depends on humans, on us, not that much on technologies. It doesn't mean, though, that we shall not look at how these technologies are being developed. I agree with David that we are not really looking at how programmers develop algorithms, right? What values are embedded in those algorithms. And it is a challenge. If you look at educational curriculum of programmers all over the world, you won't see any subjects dealing with law, right? Programmers do not learn law, right? They develop algorithms they see fit, right? They usually develop algorithms according to the needs of their employers. So we need to do something about it. We need to make sure that programmers and organizations that develop software, they do it according to a clear set of rules. And here is where another challenge lies. The clarity of rules concerning the internet. I've got real issues with it. We do not really have international instruments dealing with the internet. We've got convention on cybercrime. We've got a few other instruments, such as there is a convention on e-commerce. But there are few states that signed and ratified these instruments. We really lack a true body of international law. Of course, treaties are not everything, right? Another source of international law is international custom. But who's researching international customs in the area of the internet? Not many people. So we face a challenge of translating existing body of international law into the digital domain. The European Union, on the other hand, is trying to do something in this area, right? We've got roughly around 30 directives and regulations that pertain to the internet. But surprisingly, not all of these regulatory attempts are successful. For instance, the aforementioned GDPR that is going to enter into force next year, it's a comprehensive set of regulatory measures aimed at protecting privacy, but I have to say at the same time, it's very, very hard to read. I don't think many people know really what's inside this act, and it's going to be very hard to apply. I think one of the major challenges ahead of us is to translate the norms of the internet society, or the future norms of internet society, into a set of norms that will be relatively easy to apply especially by programmers, by developers. If you frame those norms in such vague terms as GDPR uses, there are risks. There are risks involved. And I also believe that technology shall be also viewed as the enabler of human rights, not only as the threat to human rights. For instance, without the internet, without the World Wide Web, we wouldn't have the freedom of speech as we have it today, right? It really enabled the global society to function. Without the internet, we wouldn't have the right to conduct business online, business globally, the way we have it today. It enabled small and medium enterprises to function globally. So please keep this in mind before we start seriously regulating or restricting the internet. There are, of course, threats, especially with respect to privacy, especially with respect to freedom of speech, but do not lose the sight of the benefits. So I think the challenge that is ahead of us is to uncover the norms that the internet society has developed, because I think there are norms yet to be uncovered, yet to be learned. These are basically the norms of peoples who use the internet, and this should be the basis for the regulation, as opposed to regulatory measures that are being developed independently from the internet society. In short, the laws of the futures have to be the laws that are easy to be translated into code, because the programming code will be one of the primary defensive measures of human rights in the digital society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, I think we got an overview, and we didn't talk yet even about half of the things I think we wanted to talk. But just let's start with yours. Think about what you are saying. First, a clear set of rules for the technology companies. But technology companies are private companies. A lawyer, you are a lawyer also, apart from being technology entrepreneur. The lawyer in you would know that we can regulate, and we do regulate. We put the government on the basis of law. For the private sector, we just create the boundaries. We are not telling them what to do, right? So how do we go about it? But before you answer, now everybody has a chance to ask to everybody, and I will collect questions from you. So a couple of questions, and you should really either, well, there is a microphone that is going to be a couple of microphones around. So you should speak, then it can be translated also. So let's get a couple of more questions and
Yes,
then
sure.
we'll go into this. So there is Anto, yes, please. Can we have a mic?
Morning, Anto Veldre. I'm currently employed at the Estonian State Information System Authority as an analyst. Two technical facts, one closed question. Intel management engine was affecting our computer motherboards during last 8 or 10 years. We are not completely sure whether they had a backdoor or not, whether it was used or not. Some days ago, the German Minister of Interior Affairs demanded that backdoors built into all sold devices. My question to the panel is, and it's a closed question, yes, no, nagu Preili Sokkas hommikuse konjaki joomise oled juba maha jätnud. So the question is, do you see differences between Putin influencing US president elections and German Minister of Interior Affairs influencing our e-voting, next parliament e-voting? Thank you.
Thank you. So other, yes, please. Tunne Kelam.
Thank you very much. I represent Estonia in the European Parliament, and I've been dealing for many years with cybersecurity and cyber defense. But I think the main question here is how to balance the development of technology with human consciousness and human control. Because using technology, we are becoming more and more comfortable. We trust technology, and I think today's dramatic development of technology needs conscious, responsible citizens, and that's a problem. 2 weeks ago, we had a yearly conference of European Defence Agency, and once again, there was a problem of cyber hygiene. To start from the scratch, we need to instruct our children, also civil servants, how to enter the internet in the same way as we teach children to wash their hands before enjoying the meal. And I think this is a problem we have not faced. The other question is balance between robots and human beings. Last week in the European Parliament, we listened to an expert from Daimler who told us about humanized robots who in the future will intermingle with us. And the question was, once again, what is the feedback from robots to humans? Is this an intercommunication providing us with more superficial thinking in the categories of internet, yes and no, like, don't like? I think the main challenge is how to keep our citizens responsible for the decisions and, of course, to differentiate between lies and what is truth. And, of course, to differentiate between rights and values. We very often respond to every attack that is an attack against our values, and we mean European style of life. It's not that. And I think we need to be very much clear what are values. For example, human dignity, solidarity, responsibility, things like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I don't see any hands at the moment, so let's go to the panel and let's try to make sense of what we all were talking and what the questions were. The questions, as I understand, yes or no, are there differences in the technology applications? And Mr. Kelam's very rich also more or less, not a question, but presentation about different things. Coming back to the norms, which I think many of you were talking about. I mean, are there the same norms? Are there different norms in this cyberspace or introduction with the new technology? So who would want to start? Yes, please.
I might start. I think there are different norms in cyberspace, but we have not uncovered them yet. We have not learned them yet. So there are basically different societies in cyberspace, and they operate according to certain rules. There are also different nations that use the internet, and they impose their own values, right? And as a result, they see a threat coming from other nations with other values. Even yesterday, we had a discussion. For instance, the differences between United States and Europe as far as freedom of speech is concerned. In the US, for instance, which of course values freedoms of speech so highly, there are still limits to the freedom of speech, but they are set at different points compared to Europe. For instance, in the United States, the border will be on let's say, sexual or explicit content, right, which will be interpreted rather widely. In Europe, will probably afford greater freedom to this kind of speech, but the border will be on child porn, right? No one will allow this, both in the US and in Europe. On the other hand, US will be much more liberal with respect to content that deals with, for instance, Second World War. Whereas here in Europe, we'll very clearly set the border. So we live in one global internet-enabled society, but we impose different values. And at the same time, there are digital communities that have their own values, which we have not uncovered yet. I believe we have to do it.
Okay, since United States was mentioned, we have a representative from there. Do you have different values, or do we have human rights and human values, Jeff?
It's an interesting question that Paul raises, whether we're discovering our norms or negotiating our norms. And I'm not sure which the answer is. In the United States, I think we like to think that we value free speech through our First Amendment. And if code is law, as Lawrence Lessig said, which is another rephrasing of what Paul said, then the internet is the First Amendment brought to life. It is the idea that speech is valued and is open. What we're seeing now, I think, is a progression that then occurs. And that progression is going to take a great deal of time. I'm fond of pointing out that after Gutenberg invented movable type, it took 50 years before the book as we now know it to really take the shape that it did. Printing was originally known as automated writing. We see the future in the analog of the past. It took 150 years before anyone thought to invent a newspaper. Erasmus feared that the books were too much for the human brain to handle. So I think that we see in smaller scale, when blogging came out, which is how I got so involved in the internet in the early part of this century, there was a great freedom. New voices could be heard. Then soon came economic exploitation in the form of spam, and then came worse manipulation in the form of political manipulation and fake news. Same with advertising. Advertising was controlled by institutions. Then your mother could sell her jam around the world on Google, and then advertising tools were used for spam and then for manipulation. And so I think there's a progression that is occurring here where we see an exercise of freedom and a joy in that freedom, then some could say an overdose in it, then exploitation for economic reasons, exploitation for political reasons, then a desire for control, but ultimately we figure out our norms and we come up with a new level of comfort in how we operate. One example, when cameras came on all of these, I remember there was a bit of a brief moral panic that people would take these cameras into the gym and locker room and sauna and take pictures. As if this machine was suddenly going to make us uncivil and as if this machine was suddenly going to make us horrible to other people, as if we could blame the technology for doing it to us. No, but the truth is, we don't want to go take pictures of each other. We know that's wrong. We figure out our norms. You don't take this into the locker room. We know how to do that. We are negotiating these norms. It could take quite a bit of time. I think if you argued that the internet is akin to movable type, then in Gutenberg time, we're only about the year 1479. This process is very early.
Thank you very much. So, yes.
Yeah, I just want to comment on this issue of education on internet. I think that it is very important where we should invest. I think that the first steps should include public education, aim at teaching citizens how to detect fake and misleading news. We have in a center, we have next year plan to produce a so-called e-learning project for the schools. It will be published in many languages, and it is like a game, so the school children can learn to recognize fake news, and then they can proceed to the different levels when they proceed on that game. But that will be out next year.
Thank you. Yes, Ivar.
I also wanted to reflect on what member of European Parliament Kelam said, that question of how to balance, since using common sense were the last words that I used as well. And yeah, this rising of conscious citizens, it is important. I guess that our, at least in Estonia, school system does already now quite a good job, because looking at my children, I can see that they know more than I do. It means that they didn't learn it from home. And also I hope that hybrid Center of Excellence has even more field in this in the future. But about humans and robots, I saw the movie Space Odyssey 2000 when I was a child, and of course it has somehow influenced me, and I've thought about the question that you raised as well, and definitely some balance is needed, but so far humankind has proved to be quite poor in predicting future, so we all are waiting for artificial intelligence for quite a long time, but we still don't know how it actually will work out. And so far it has always been that technology first, and the regulation only follows. It's I guess would be too hard to try to regulate something that doesn't exist, and we don't know how it is going to exist yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. And yes, Mojca.
Yes. Again, as the previous speakers, I too want to address your question, as I think it's important in terms of rising awareness not only of youth, but of across generations of the means of the new technology. And media education is one way to go, not only in terms of youth gaining new knowledge of possible threats and possible gains in new media, but also learning to use technology through which to respect diversity, to respect human rights. You mentioned before that we've kind of learned about the norms of privacy using the Facebook in different public spheres, so to speak. But we also see, for example, youth using online technologies to bully, to exclude the other, not only youth, but of course. So this responsible use, not only learning the technical aspects, but learning the responsibility in the use, which goes back to the debate on the respect of human rights, of course. And media education, I think, is one way to go, definitely.
Okay, so we have some ideas how to move on, and questions about the norms. By the way, if I may, I would just share one observation that I had when Council of Europe worked out cybercrime conventions, and what was interesting was that 40 countries representatives who came together to do the work before it was ready, they could agree pretty well to the basic norms. I mean, what is right and what is false. To react to that there should be a clear set of principles. I think this clear set of principles we have already since Moses gave us those 10 commandments, kind of, I mean, thou shalt not kill and thou shalt not steal and so on. Sure. So in that sense, it is, yes, more a question of translating them into the current environment what Mojca was just speaking about. I mean, there is this other side, I mean, what we haven't yet talked about. Maybe somebody, and I would encourage, is thinking about this balancing, where to draw the line. I mean, the predictive analytics. Ivo was very much kind of skeptical that artificial intelligence has yet to cause any big harm. Probably because we don't know, we fear it more than we should, maybe, or otherwise would. But still, I mean, there are questions really, I think, that go to these fundamental human rights issues. I mean, one of these issues has been that people have the same rights. And all of a sudden, when you know that the computer image sort of analytics can predict something about you, and then some action can be taken. Where do you actually draw the line, what is right and what is wrong? And how does it, this technology enforce sort of the society's different norms? We were discussing yesterday, you know, now the artificial intelligence programs can already predict by facial recognition over 90% certainty whether a person is homosexual or not, whatever the sexual kind of inclination is. In the Western world, we don't have problem with that generally. But in many countries, it is still an offense. And so whether these countries would put the computers and screen the oncoming tourists or business people, what would happen? I mean, there are so many questions coming out of it. Okay, this is maybe going to a slippery slope, but let's take something else. I mean, what is used, what was referenced, I think was Mr. Griffiths said initially, a lot of predictive analytics used in policing already today. Where do, I mean, and it is used very well, let's say, in Israel. It has been a long time this kind of trend. They are not taking everybody with the same sort of, with the same rights or non-rights. Let's say, like all of you, when you go through the screening at the airport, you have to drop the water bottles away because maybe there is something or somebody sometime put something threatening materials there, but now we all have to sort of get rid of the water in this checkpoint. But maybe, and the Israelis have been doing it long time, they screen people differently. They tend to assign certain values to them that they don't assign to the others. So now the machines are doing this. In some places it works, but should it work? Where do we draw the line? Any questions, any speeches? Please show your hands. Yes, that is in the back, please. Oh.
Well, I'm not in the back, but I got the microphone first. My name is Julian Burge. I'm going to speak a little bit later. I'm from United Kingdom. Mine's a very simple question, and it's really related to ownership and control of internet, media, and so forth. My first reaction is, how can I have confidence in these social media and these new kind of internet companies which are privately owned and are only concerned in a sense with profit? How do we bring that under control? Who owns the internet? Who is controlling the internet? This is not under some kind of international regime. So my question is, what is the factor of ownership? How is that important? And how is that perhaps influencing? And of course, in my own country, we are deeply concerned with the concentration of media in fewer and fewer private hands, and how that has an influence eventually on our own understanding of what's going on politically and so forth, and on human rights. Thank you.
Thank you very much. There was another question.
I'm Helle Diekman. I'm the chair of the Estonian Association of Journalists. And as journalism and media has been a little bit talked about already, and well, I have a question mainly to Jeff Jarvis, but of course to the whole panel. And it goes to your remark about the blame that is put on a technical possibilities when it comes to media economy model collapsing sort of thing. But I see that also the technology is being blamed for the change in journalism, that the traditional journalism dies because of a new technology, and that the old ways of doing it, the old genres and all of that becomes insignificant because new technology, is a threat. To my point of view, it's actually an excuse. People like to hide behind it because they're lazy or greedy or whatever. And, actually journalism does not, live in technology. It lives in other ways, in people. Any comment on that? What exactly should we do so that people won't give that excuse so much?
Thank you very much. Should we go to answering this? Yes, we'll start with Jeff because you were mentioned, but I'm sure others have also their say.
I get in trouble with my fellow journalists sometimes, but I think that we tend to act as if God gave us the revenue and the methods we had, and that journalism the way it was journalism the way it always should be, and I don't believe that. I think that the internet has forced me to reconsider the very definition of journalism and how it relates to society. It's not the creation of a product. That's a Gutenberg era notion. Journalism is a service. And journalism in the end should measure its success or failure upon whether or not the public is informed. And I've changed my definition of journalism fairly fundamentally a few times. I teach entrepreneurial journalism. I teach students to start businesses to try to keep journalism alive. And I used to define journalism as helping a community organize its knowledge to better organize itself. That's an information-based definition. But after our election in the United States, and I apologize to you all for the results, I've seen that we have a more fundamental problem, and that is civility. We are being uncivil to each other as a society, and I think that civility becomes a precondition to being able to be informed and be open to other ideas. So my new definition of journalism for myself and how I teach my students is to convene communities into civil, informed, and productive conversation. And the internet enables us to do this in ways that we never could before. We can convene communities together and then try to inform them as part of that process. That's fundamentally different. But the business model is what stops us, because we still have the mass media business model, which is all about volume. I need more eyeballs for longer, which leads inevitably, in American terms, to cats and Kardashians. It inevitably leads to doing cheap tricks to get people's attention, rather than judging what we do on the basis of the value we bring. And so I think we have to fundamentally experiment with new business models. It's a very long process. And to answer the earlier point from the UK, I'm not sure where this lands out right now. You may not trust companies to run the internet, but if the internet were in the hands of the United States government right now, it would be in the hands of Donald Trump. whom I certainly don't trust to run the internet. So I think that just as we negotiate norms, we negotiate power still as to who is really in charge of it. And we've seen so far that the people on the internet have been able to rise up together and protect it in past efforts on areas like net neutrality. But right now we're losing. And I fear what we're losing to is not corporations, we're losing to governments trying to control the internet because the internet threatens them. So I'm not sure who should win in that yet.
Thank you very much. Mojca, yes.
Yes, I mean, to both points, indeed, we've seen rising of concentration of the media. The oligopoles are, in a way, governing in the last 20 years, governing the global media field. We have 10 media companies that include Google and Facebook, who are the owners of the entire global communication. So it's not only the question of political hijacking, but also the commercial hijacking of the media field. So for me, the question is really how to negotiate these restrictions. So the media, the potential for the commercialized ideologization or the political. So both are equally relevant. So in terms of ownership, I think that also the regulation in the European history has shown some progress in the sense of securing the public from commercial speech. So I think that we are seeing a rise of the commercial speech online. So we can speak of commercial rights, the rights to commerce, but what about citizens' rights? So I think this is the question that journalism is faced with, and that to the remark from the back of the lady, it's indeed journalism is seeing changes, both positive and negative. We've seen deprofessionalization of journalism. We have seen precarization of journalism also in this global oligopolistic media field. We've seen gender divides that are still, for example, in the media sector, that are still reproducing, which are all human rights issues. But on the other hand, it's again, we should not blame the technologies, because on the other hand, I mean, journalists are now, information is more accessible to journalists. So it is indeed multitasking, it is demanding. Journalists are more and more pushed into producing reactions that are very quick, which all affects negatively the quality of news. So I think that the future of journalism should, in a way, think of all these advantages, pros and cons of the internet, and we've also seen the emerging of alternative publics, the emerging citizen journalism, for example. And for me, the question for the future would be how to combine these traditional changing ways of journalism together with new private publics that are emerging online, and to make sense in terms of enabling the public to be able to get quality news, quality information.
One thing with journalism is, if I may also chip in, I mean, what I've been thinking of is we used to be very concerned when we talked about the human rights, and that there was this censorship in the Eastern Bloc countries, and that was very bad. Then the Iron Curtain fell, and censorship, the state-run censorship, disappeared. But hasn't it returned actually now? It has been privatized, and we are not talking about it really. Because I recently had an issue trying to react to something online, which, I mean, with my comment. And then it turned out to be impossible, because I was informed by the machines that I have been unpolite. and I can assure that I don't use this kind of bad words. Or so somebody didn't like my previous comment, it was removed, and I was black labeled or whatever. So it is now the Facebooks, the whatever in Estonia or Delphis, who actually exercise the censorship, and we don't see a problem. Instead, we actually, I think, if we judge American media now, or American Congress, encouraging more and more this kind of censorship by the private actors themselves.
I saw a tweet 2 days ago that said that 2006 to 2016, internet companies are affecting what we say, that's evil. And then 2017, internet companies aren't affecting what we say, that's evil. We've changed the rules here where I think that people like me who are very much internet advocates loved the openness of the internet. But we didn't fully recognize that that openness leads to potentially both incivility and to manipulation. And so we realized then that we need some measure of control, but who controls and how much is very much an open question. My instinct is to move toward openness. I was just in Kiev last week where, for understandable reasons, they have cut off all Russian media and cut off Vkontakte. I understand why. In the American First Amendment view, it's almost as if you allow the speech. We have RT on American television still, but we try to inoculate the public through journalism against the lies that are told there. Does it work or does it not work? This is a very difficult negotiation of power right now.
But isn't it actually that you are now labeling it foreign agent and trying to take away the label journalism there, right? So.
Yes, and that's a challenging issue.
But you're then talking what Matti was mostly addressing. I mean, finally, what we can do, how we can sort of get rid of it is maybe a wrong word. We can't, but improve the situation comes through the hygiene, comes through the education, and it is a long process. And we all, I think, agreed. I mean, you all in your presentations somehow underlines that we are still in the pretty beginning of the road, right?
Yeah. Yes, it's one thing which include this discussion is also that we always discuss and speak about the counter narratives and not so much about our active narratives. So that it's always in our societies we are always countering but not acting more proactive.
Paul, I'm sure you have something to say about ownership of internet.
Ownership of internet, yes, but I would like to refer to your earlier remark with respect to your comments about blocking comments, right? This is yet another example of lack of clear rules, right? So on the face, we all have the right to free speech, but if you look at the nitty-gritty details, you'll realize that, at least in the European Union, we don't really know how to handle offensive comments, right? The rules aren't clear. Because you refer to the rules stemming from the Delphi judgment, right? And this is the position of the European Court of Human Rights, which essentially encourages private censorship or ordering. But then if you look at the position of the Luxembourg Tribunal following the judgment in the Google France case, the situation is completely opposite, right? The Google France case underlies the importance of being passive, neutral, automatic. And if you are passive, right, if you do not react to comments, essentially, you are granted a safe harbor, right? You won't be liable for comments of others, unless you, of course, get informed about it, then you have to react. So we do not really have a clear set of rules how to react, and I think it itself is a threat from other perspective to human rights, for instance, the right to free speech or the right to do business online, because you have to know, for instance, as the entrepreneur online, what is the desirable behavior. You have to know, shall I be, for instance, active and actively look for offensive material, or, as the current e-commerce directive says, no, you are entitled to be passive and you are not obliged to monitor the content that is online. Okay, as far as who owns the internet, yes, it's very unclear. We know that the internet is the huge infrastructure, right? It's a global infrastructure, and there are so many different players who owns part of this global infrastructure that it's simply impossible to say who owns this, who owns these cables, all these satellites, all these different ways and means of transmitting signals, then who owns applications, different applications. Yeah, the second part is probably easier to discover and
okay,
answer.
but maybe we should rephrase this question or think about, I mean, there is another influence yet from the technology side. What the internet has done, it has really given rise to concentration of economies and the power that comes with it. When we think of that, I mean, and then who owns the internet, kind of, or who creates the new rules? It is the private sector. It is Facebook who is creating the rules of privacy. And it is the European Commission or American Congress who are running behind, not 10 meters behind, but 10 kilometers behind. So is it right? Should we leave it to the companies? I mean, it is clear in this private business-oriented actions that if there is a opening, it will be filled. Somebody will grab it. So these companies have created these rules, and generally we are happy with them. But what happens if we will not be happy with them? If the power is in these very few hands, that might be also a very big threat to the common future that we want, right? Now, there is another side to this story which is a little bit nicer to think, or this positive side. Namely, there is a technology called blockchain that you probably have all heard about. And that is one of these disruptive technologies. And what it does really is actually it is decentralizing some of this centralized power that was before. Why the banks are so worried, and the chairmen of different banks are issuing statements and saying that, oh, these cryptocurrencies are from evil. It is that the bank's monopoly on money and power that comes with the money is actually now threatened a bit, and there is a new sort of possibility of decentralization of the societies, and maybe that is our savior, not the privatization and things like that. But we want audience to talk, not us only, please. Anybody? Yes.
Hindrek Lootus, Tallinn University. I've been teaching environmental policy and environmental law already for years by now. And one of the issues I touched there is the right to clean environment, and whether this is or isn't a basic human right. And environmental lawyers are pretty much in consensus now, most of them, that it is a human right. And my question is that should the same approach be taken with a right to true, unbiased, adequate information? Maybe it is already under discussion somewhere, maybe it's declared already, I just don't know, I wonder. Well, the freedom of speech is of course human right, this goes without saying, but I just stress the right to non-biased, adequate, true information. Not absolute truth as such, it doesn't exist, but just information. Thank you.
Interesting. So, non-biased information. Any other questions? Should we go on to the post-truth world and whether there is such a thing as non-biased information? Who would like to start? Ivo, you haven't...
Yes.
Well, I don't think that I'm going into that is the true existing or is there objective information or unbiased information existing. But however, if we want to enforce it somehow, then there should be somebody who would define what is true and what is objective and what is not. And it's maybe not such a problem with, I don't know, with very easy facts like, I don't know, 2 people died in the car crash. It's possible to go and check if there are 2 bodies and so on. But if we get more to this side that what is good and what is bad, or as you earlier put it, what is wrong and what is not, then I'm afraid it's very hard to find such authority. And again, I'm a little bit skeptical if the machine can do it for us.
Yes, but Jeff, I mean, you checked whether there were the bodies in the inauguration or were they not. I mean, and Sean Spicer was laughed at quite a bit around the world. So is there a way, should we somehow delineate and say there is a non-biased information, free, clean, like environment? I mean, that's a good idea, like a clean environment, clean information.
We in journalism used to believe that we were objective and that we were the holders of that truth. I come to see that there is no such thing as objectivity in that sense. And even in, we see right now a challenge against science, which is a large problem. But within science, it is about debate to discern the truth, to discern the facts, to get somewhere. I would worry about a world in which someone is anointed to decide what is truth, what is a fact, what is unbiased. I think instead, as to the point of the member of the European Parliament, what we're trying to do is to educate the public, educate our children to be able to judge better for themselves and to figure out where this goes. Let me give you an example of where this stands right now with the platforms. After the election, Google's top search executives called a bunch of people and said, what do we do? And their belief was that their search ranking was unbiased. And my response was that you may believe, your mirror, Google's mirror to the world may indeed be flat and true and perfect, but the world warps itself to influence Google. And that Google had no choice but to compensate for the manipulation that occurs. So for example, if a year ago you searched for climate change on Google, you would have gotten, I think, fairly good results. But if your search query was, is climate change real? You got half crap. Why? Google values relevance. Google wanted to know the needs of the user. It listened to the user's behavior. So people who were, in my view, ignorant enough to ask, is climate change real, were also ignorant enough to click on conspiracy theories. So they rose up. And so that's how Google got bad results. Well, Google made a decision in April to now account for the reliability, authority, and quality of sources in search ranking. So now if your question is like a 3rd grade girl coming in doing her homework and asking, is climate change real? The answer is science. Google has decided to side with the institution of science. That's a very big deal. So we have now given Google that opportunity to do that because the system, the algorithm, did a bad job before. It was manipulated by conspiracy theorists. And I'm glad that Google has done that. But let's be aware that we've given them that power. Finally, back to your question, I think that the hard part here is to not regulate the technology, but to continue to legislate to principles. Quick example in the United States. In the US, our mail communication is private against government capture only if it is sent via a first-class letter, because the law was written to the technology of the Postal Service. So when along came email and direct messages and all these other things, they were not protected. They still are not protected. The law should have been written to the principle that your private communications are presumed private from government unless there's a due process warrant. But the law wasn't written that way. So I would urge this discussion to occur not at a level of technologies, but instead at a level of principles?
Well, maybe quick question to Mojca. You have a different European perspective to this American one on the clean environment? Yes.
On the regulation. I mean, I see that there are, we spoke before, robots were mentioned, artificial intelligence, that these things are developing, and for me the challenge would be how they would be inflicted with norms in terms of still being stimulating the judgment that differentiates truth and lie. I still think that we should be aware that the internet is also producing a lot of hate speech, for example. I mean, you spoke before of censorship, and we have the Human Rights Declaration, of course, valuing free speech, but the internet has not only enabled the progressive communities to develop online, to enable discourses, but has also have been used as a tool to spread hate online. And for me, still the responsibility is in the political field, so claiming responsibility to the political and to the economic elite would be a way to go. In terms of hate speech, we are, I think the right for free speech is being many times manipulated to the extent that it tolerates hate speech. So, you know, we are seeing politicians nowadays claiming their right for free speech. But of course, free speech is related to human rights, is related to questions of equal society. So it has its history where citizens, the idea was that citizens are protected from the abuse of the authority. And now we are in a situation at moments where the same authority is claiming the right for their speech, using it as a, as a curve to reproduce hate speech and anti-human rights. So my challenge here is, also goes along the regulation, because not, of course, to regulate the freedom of speech as such, but to try to think of possible future ways of enabling or developing regulation along the lines of responsibility, meaningful public debate. So this, for me, would be what regulation would be. Not to limit the speech and all the goods of the technology, but really how to enable the citizens, or how to help the citizen to to secure the space for reflexive democracy, like you were saying. So what is the argument, the value in the argument, and that, of course, differs.
Thank you. I will now take the last round of questions. I would like to leave every panelist also 1 minute for the final statements. But before that, we go to this. Maybe there are still some questions. Yes, please. There is another one. Okay, just the microphone coming up. This lady is it naisterahvas seal? Oops. Ah, okay. Well, okay, we'll take it in a different line, but we're not forgetting it. No.
Hi, my name is Paulo Irat. I'm a journalist too, and I'm performing into philosophy right now, but I still love the trade. Now, one of the main obstacles human rights have is that they rely on states to be implemented. Without a state, they cannot be human rights. That's their main weakness. And listening to you all, this leads me to think, when I look at the internet and there's a complaint that it's excessively commercialized, it's an internet of consumers rather than of citizens. With citizens, we're relating to the state. And picking on what Mojca has just said on how to create spaces for reflection, I go back to the pre-internet era in which we had these spaces for civic interaction with the state that were clearly defined and constituted through the press, the public sphere, and all this was disrupted by the internet. That we'll know. And I think the question right now, and I'm interested in your thoughts on this, is how can we articulate the internet as a civic space? Now, this has the limitation that a civic is defined by the state, and it might need to be a sort of a civility or e-civic state. But what could we do about this?
What can we do about it, indeed? Yes, there was another question, so please.
Thank you. My name is Tia Möller, and I'm from Finland, Ministry of Justice. My question relates to the rule of law. Today's debate links to the rule of law very closely. Earlier this fall, ministers in the Council of EU discussed also this new technology posing threats to respect the rule of law. And the ministers tried to identify best practices, how to tackle this issue that it poses to the rule of law. My question to you all is what kind of best practices there are or there could be, and how we could deal with this in relation to the rule of law. And we have heard already more rules, or clearer rules and education. But is there more to do with this?
Okay, best practices and rule of law question to everybody. Is there another question? Last one? No, there is no question. So anybody wants to react to these questions first, and then we'll have the final statements.
Rule of law should start with Paul.
Yes, I just to my Finnish colleague. Hi.
Please, go ahead.
We have started a program developing. It's named and called resilient legislation, which means that we try to look those loopholes and vulnerabilities in our legislation which can be misused. And it's also include so-called unclearances between the competencies of authorities. So that these kind of project we have now started, and I hope that we will then provide some kind of best practices also in a coming year.
Okay, best practice rule of law from Poland?
Well, firstly, I'll reiterate again that we've got basic principles, basic human rights, but we still have not managed to translate them into the digital age properly. So we need to do this task, and we can either rely on politicians who are going to do it for us, or for companies who are going to set it according to their goals. Or we're going to, for instance, learn from the society itself by learning how the internet society functions, and by uncovering those rules. So I would also include this. I would learn what the majority, how does majority act, how also do minorities act. For instance, we didn't have and still do not have any regulation concerning how to secure transactions in cyberspace. But it evolved naturally, right? Companies started to use first 40-bit encryption, then 120-bit encryption. Now some are using 256-bit encryption, and it's not imposed by any international or national or even European regulation. So I would try to uncover this, and I would also advise to create really simple rules. Rules that can be expressed, for instance, through labels on web pages, right? That I'm following this set of norms or rules so that everyone can easily learn it, not only human, but also computers, right? So computers can check to what norms or set of values do you adhere to. And so we already have examples of it. For instance, Creative Commons licenses use these kind of licenses that are also recognizable to software. And I think this is the path forward.
Okay, How about now 1 minute to everybody to sum up or say something about your institution and good practices there, and we'll start with Jeff.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm very glad you're having this discussion because I think it's very important. And to your question about the rule of law and yours about the civic space, I think we have to question our very notions of the nation now. And we have to recognize that it came in part out of a Gutenberg era, and we don't know where we're headed now. I think that in terms of law, we're going to see that the technology is ahead of the lawmaker, inevitably. And so we have to encourage companies to self-regulate. When you think about it, Google started with a law, don't be evil. And that was a license to the employees to keep Google honest, and it was a recognition that being evil right now is bad for business, because if you're a bad company, people will talk about you and leave you. And don't be evil, I think, worked pretty well for a while, but now it's not good enough. Now be good is the expectation we should have of these companies, because they do own the internet and the future, and they are going at a fast speed, and we have to expect them to operate under an expectation of moral authority. And that's a high barrier, but that's what we should expect of them.
Thank you, Jeff. I like your optimism. I'm thinking about the hedge funds and how they did good. Mojca.
Yes, I would differentiate here between the nation and the state, going back to your remark. So I'm a bit, reserved of leaving the regulation or unregulation to the companies. So for me, the thinking of the future would be also, a way to think of civic, how to regulate internet, also at the state level. Although, of course, at the state level today means transnationally, because states, of course, need to act or are acting globally. Because in relation to the companies, we are also seeing that states are weakening. So remember the several trade agreements and so on. So Zygmunt Bauman spoke of this, the phenomenon of weak states. So for me, the challenge is also how in this globalized, commercialized internet world, what's the role of the state? Going also back to the notion of the public sphere, in the previous times, true, we had some ideals of the rational debate, but mind you, these were only few people. It were largely male, women didn't enter, minorities didn't enter. So now, in the internet era, you have this wider citizenry participating. But at the same time, we've seen the deterioration of edu domains, for example, which were in the 80s at a very high level, and the .com domains. So we've seen brutal commercialization of the web. So, so for me, the challenge is how to, for the future, how to use this technological innovation to stimulate civic space online, and also thinking along the lines of regulation, the state, the companies, the dialogue, and of course the citizens here as actors.
Thank you, Mojca. Ivo.
Well, yeah, to state and private enterprises, my previous speakers already spoke a little bit more, but in my final word, I would come back to the question that whom we should blame, the technology or the journalists, and as everybody has agreed that it's pointless to blame the technology, and everybody who knows some journalists, how hardworking people they are, then probably you know that they can't be blamed in laziness as well. So if we have to blame somebody, it's not maybe so good idea than us as consumers maybe. So definitely we should work with ourselves and our with other people as well, in order to have this media literacy and meaningful debate that has been mentioned earlier as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivo. Matti.
Yes, in 1 minute, our hybrid COE is a multinational network. At the moment, 12 countries and EU and NATO are working to get better understanding of these hybrid threats. And one of the goals is to connect expertise from the practitioner's side, academic side, and the private partnerships, private companies side. So we hope that when we connect these three main fields of the actors, we can organize good workshops and good seminars, and please follow our activities, and you are very welcome to participate in our activities. Thank you.
And indeed, it is very relevant to our country also. I mean, those in the West are still in, well, half blissful ignorance, I think. Paul.
I think for years to come, we will observe the competition, regulatory competition between states and between private actors, major companies, in the regulation of the internet. I would like to see the involvement of the civic society and the development and in the inclusion of norms of the civic society in this process. But however we regulate it, I would like to underline again, let's not lose the sight of the potential benefits of these technologies. I hope that we'll see these technologies also the enabler of the most fundamental human rights, even the right to life. So let's hope that every one of us will have a chance to live, I don't know, 120, 150 years, or even as some claim 1,000 years. Because of robots or nanorobots that will be implanted and will help us to live longer, happier life. So this is what I hope for all of us, and thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo. Thank you very much, everybody. We are now in overtime, so I'm not going to make a long speech to sum everything up. Just one last observation. That I actually thought, and from the crowd I usually go, they are much more gloomy. You were much more optimistic here. Let's continue this discussion. Let's hope this optimism can be saved, and will because that is probably what drives our world forward. So a big applause to the panelists. Thank you very much.
Aitäh esinejatele. Ja ka minul tekkis üks mõte, kui oli juttu kallutamata informatsioonist. Meenutan oma lapsepõlve Nõukogude Liidu ajal, kus ajalehe juhtkiri ja uudised sageli ei kattunud selle ühiskonnaga, mida ma oma silmadega nägin. Aga tollal ei olnud ka vahendeid teistsuguse arvamuse esitamiseks, mis veel olulisem, enamasti nappis julgust selleks. Nüüd on need vahendid olemas. Loodan, et meil on aega ka järele mõelda oma arvamuste üle. Mõni sõnaga me näeme siin seinte peal mitmesuguseid pilte. Need on tänavakunstnik Eduard von Lõnguse koostatud. Paneb kokku ootamatuid asju, ka meie üritame oma konverentsil erinevaid ja ootamatuid asju koos vaadata. Ja veel nii palju, et Eduard von Lõngus on praegu ka liikumas Euroopa riikides, linnades, kus tema 10. loomeaasta puhul, Eesti eesistumise puhul ja ka meie riigi läheneva 100. aastapäeva puhul kasutab ka mobiilirakendusi oma kunsti levitamisel. Aga nüüd oleme ära teeninud lõuna. Kella 1-ni on meil siis lõunapaus, kella 1-ni pärast lõunat, siis jätkame järgmise paneeliga, kas Euroopa põhiõigused on kriisi lävil ja kas inimõigused on vaba languses. Aga seniks jätku leivale ja head isu. Aitäh!